Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Watching the Boxes Fantasy Basketball Podcast. I am your host, Mike. Me, as always, is my co-host, Tyler Watts. What's up, Tyler?
Not a lot, Mike. How are you today?
I'm doing pretty good. Tyler. I'm kind of excited for the show. We're doing a little episode about auction drafts and snake drafts, and we have a special guest joining us. I'm pretty excited about it. We got Alex Raclean from RotoWire. Alex, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on the show. Fantasy season is right around the corner, and we figured we'd do a couple shows about introducing people who maybe don't know a lot about fantasy basketball, or those who really just are that far too into it, like us, just to go after how we approach our auction drafts and snake drafts, and maybe get some hints and tips out to the listeners. But I'm really happy you came on the show, and you write over at RotoWire for a bunch of different things, right? You don't just do basketball.
For RotoWire, I mostly do basketball. I sort of dabble in their football. A lot of my football stuff you can actually find over on DraftKings. But nice. I pretty much stick to those two, basketball and football.
You're getting a cut of that DraftKings money, huh? That's where it's at.
Never enough.
Yeah, they're only just multi-millionaires, every single one of them who started that, and good on them. I have not been really following the NFL this year, and nor do I terribly want to, because the NBA is like right around the corner. Have you done any drafts yet for any of your leagues?
I haven't done any actual drafts. I've been in a couple of sort of mocks with some RotoWire, some Chris Tower from CBS had one that I was in last week, and Kyle McEwen from Basketball Monster had one that I was in last week.
Yeah, we know so Kyle. That's a good name drop. We know Kyle.
Yeah, no, they're both great. Kyle actually is how I got started in this business, so I'm super appreciative of him. And so I've done a couple of mock drafts, but I haven't done a legitimate draft yet.
Yeah, I haven't done one either. Tyler, you got one coming up, right? One of those serious Josh Lloyd ones.
Yeah, I had one last Saturday with Mr. Josh Lloyd himself. It was a good night.
That's the league where it's absurdly large, right?
Yeah, 420 players or so get drafted. So like pretty much everyone who's alive in the NBA today.
Jesus.
Yeah, that's aggressive. Did that take most of your weekend, or how'd that go?
Well, see, it's like a keeper league, so.
Uh-oh.
Basketball Monster doesn't even like show beyond the top 180.
The very first.
Timeout. So Tyler, you cut out there.
I know. I heard it.
This is pretty easy to edit. All right, I'll just pick up with. We've been having troubles the last couple episodes. All right, cool. I'll just pick up with something and we'll just roll. So I like to play auction drafts. That's my favorite way of doing it. I'm an auction roto 9cat type of guy. Alex, do you have like a preference of drafts that you like to do?
The opposite of you.
Perfect.
I prefer snake and I prefer 8cat.
Really? Why the 8cat? So that's I think one of the bigger discrepancies in the fantasy basketball world is that, do you include turnovers? Do you not include turnovers? And now some people will go out there and have like 15 categories, and I guess one of the nice things, if you want to look at it that way, is that you can play fantasy basketball almost in any way you dream of. But I'd like to see the community kind of start focusing around 9cat, 8cat, head-to-head roto categories, and that's it.
So I'm definitely with you. I prefer head-to-head. I like 8cat for a couple of reasons. One, so many people effectively ignore turnovers when you're drafting that it almost just like it kind of makes it less, to me, that makes it less fun. You know, I want everyone to be sort of competing on an even keel. And if half the league is basically ignoring one of the categories, that to me is sort of making it less even. I don't like the negative value aspect of it. You know, there might be some bias just because I started in 8-cat, but I've always enjoyed 8-cat more.
How long have you been playing fantasy basketball?
I think I started in 2009. I started football before I started basketball.
Okay.
And I started football when I started college, which is 2005. So it's somewhere around 2009.
You, Tyler, you young cats. You guys, I mean, you guys are coming late to the game because I remember playing way back in the day, back in 2001 in high school. And I actually had Jalen Rose on one of my Yahoo teams.
That's just because you're old, Mike. Just
I'm an old man, and I'm just going to allow that to be the credit that I have over everybody else, even though that doesn't really mean I know what the hell I'm talking about.
One of my favorite things, though, as someone who started a little later, is going back and looking at some of the great players from before I played, like Amare Stoudemire and Andre Karolinko as top 10 overall fantasy players. You know,
yeah.
I remember when I discovered that, it just blew my mind.
Rashard Lewis, he was great. Brad Miller was always a go-to back in the day. We should just do a history of fantasy basketball podcast one of these days. I would love that. That'd be a fun time.
Fantasy basketball porn podcast by Mike Catrone.
It's just a bunch of old dudes talking about their drafts from 2003 that nobody cares about. That wouldn't be too bad. So I kind of wanted to take this opportunity to talk about some of the different auction strategies. So snake and auction are like drastically different. I think a lot of people start with the snake draft. It's the first thing that comes up. It's usually pretty normal. It's easy to organize. It's easy to figure out. And there's like a lot of draft resources for snake drafts. But what I find is there's not a ton of draft resources for auction drafts. Do you play a lot of auction drafts, snake drafts? Like, what's your preference of choice? The auction?
That to me?
Yeah. Yes.
So, I mean, I think I'm sort of in the minority of the sort of people who play hardcore in terms of preferring snake. I've been in a couple of auction leagues for a while. They're definitely a lot of fun. It is nice because, you know, this year I hate everyone between picks 35 and, 50. And, in an auction draft, I can skip that. So that's kind of nice. And I also I think I do a pretty good job in the late rounds. I think one of my skills as an analyst is, rounds 9, 10, 11, and 12 in a snake draft. And so in an auction draft, I can sort of load up on some of those guys.
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. It's kind of the give and take of the difference between auction and snake, is that in auction you can really build any team you want, any team at all. And in a snake draft, you got to play with the flow of the draft. And it only takes one person to take your guy, and then it completely derails your entire strategy. And like you're talking about with head-to-head, everybody's punting turnovers, but if you're punting steals and you're waiting for some guy who's going to fit perfectly and he gets taken 3 picks before you, you're kind of screwed. With an auction draft, you can pay extra and get that guy. And that's kind of why I like auction drafts. It really it's an extra level of strategy when you're approaching your draft. Tyler, are you doing a lot of auction drafts this year as well?
I think pretty much every league I play in but one is an auction draft. So
you're aggressive.
I just think that the auction drafts, they take longer, but I love the fact that I can get anybody I want, and there's no way you can stop me. If I got the money, I can bid and have anybody I want.
And so, like, how do you usually approach an auction draft, Tyler? Are you just ranking it based on how you personally rank those players? Do you have to take into account, some of the people that are in these leagues? How do you look at it when you're coming into the draft? How do you prepare?
Basically, I'm a guy who prepares by taking either my rankings or someone like Mark's rankings that you can find, and you take those auction values and basically you put people in kind of buckets where you're saying, okay, these guys are all worth like $70, and then these guys are worth 40 and 50, and just kind of putting them all together kind of in ranges. And then I kind of weed out the guys I want from those ranges and try to pick. And then I always kind of have a backup strategy in the sense of saying, like, okay, I want John Wall, but if I don't get John Wall, maybe I'll go after Chris Paul at relatively the same price. And I feel like that just always kind of lets me get the team that I want to end up with.
Oh, no, that makes a lot of sense. And you're almost kind of tiering players, not just based on their position rank when you see a lot of positional tiers out there, but you're kind of tiering everybody based on just their talent and how much they're going to give back to you, so you can properly put a price on those people. Is that how you kind of approach auction drafts, Alex, or do you have a different way of looking at it?
So for auction drafts, I mean, I definitely have my, pre-draft ranks and my positional tiers. I more go into it sort of with a mindset of I think about it more in terms of just how I get people to spend money during the draft, and how I always try to get people to bid up on players that I don't like early, and I try to sort of build on the fly around guys who I find to be just sort of heavily discounted, and then be a bully in the middle and the later part of the draft. I mean, I go in with my own ranks. I have the sort of whatever system you're using has their dollar values, but I think of it more in terms of the financial game than the player game, if that makes sense.
Elaborate a little bit on that. You're looking at more of ensuring you're getting a kind of a discount for the players that you draft?
Yeah, effectively. So I mean, I kind of have an idea in my head around someone who might be the #1 overall fantasy player should go for above $60, and someone who should be a top 10 should be above 50, and that. And I tend to find that the players in the 30 to 45 range are usually sort of undervalued. So often what I will do is I will sort of stay out of the most expensive players, whoever those happen to be in the draft that I'm in. Usually that's pretty predictable. This year, I don't know who the most expensive players are going to be in any draft that I enter, because the top of the draft is so open this year.
Yeah, I actually think that makes this year a little bit more interesting and a little bit more dangerous. There's it sounds like you're kind of going for the discount middle rounds and making sure you have a really deep team. Yes. While some people do the stars and scrubs kind of approach. And I'm a little bit of a hybrid when I approach auction drafts. #1, you really have to have your own personal rankings and your own personal money that you're going to bid on a player. You have to have it. Don't go by ESPN or Yahoo or whoever you're drafting with. Don't go by what they have written down on next to that guy. Like, just don't even bother doing it, because someone's going to level set the market, and that's where the market's going to be. And if you thought the market was going to be way higher than that, you're overpaying. If you thought it was going to be way lower than that, you're not going to draft anybody. You almost have to set your prices ahead of time, and then when the draft starts, you're already adjusting to the market being set around you by the players that you're playing against. And that could go really any direction. And this year, with a top 8 that's all so bunched close together, I'm actually kind of looking at letting that top 8 just go for an absurd amount of prices. Because the first couple are going to go for a lot, and then the next couple are probably going to be around market level. But then a couple with only 1 or 2 of those guys left, the people who are left who didn't get those guys are going to be so desperate, that market's going to go right back up. And then you've weeded out a lot of money off the board. And I liked what you were saying, Alex, about always bidding someone that you don't want. Just get that guy out there, get someone bidding on him, get him off the board. Some people approach it where I'm going to only throw out the guy that I want. I actually completely disagree with that. I think you should be throwing out guys that you don't want so someone actually takes them.
The only exception to that, so I agree completely. My only exception to that is if you have a particular strategy in mind and you want to build around a particular player. So maybe you know that you want to punt free throws, and so you've got your heart set on getting DeAndre Jordan. You know, maybe your first bid, you bid out someone that you don't want, but bid out DeAndre. Don't wait too long to bid out DeAndre Jordan, because you're basing your strategy around having him, and you want to know how much money you have left so that you can bid on other values without losing your chance on that key piece that you've identified. So for me last year, that was Giannis. I thought Giannis was just crazy undervalued last year, and I sort of built a bunch of strategies around him. And so he was usually the second person that I nominated, because I didn't want to miss out on those mid-round values because I didn't know how much money I needed to save for Giannis.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. Tyler, are you approaching this year any differently than you have in years past?
I mean, no, I mean, I'm always a big proponent of getting a bunch of those guys in the, like, probably 30 to 75 range. Like, I might make my whole team of 13 guys in a standard league on all those guys, just because I think that we get into a point where they're all really undervalued, and everyone kind of spent their money already on some of the big names, and now I'm left here just picking up the pieces of everybody I want in this range.
I love that strategy.
Yeah, I think you guys would be really annoying to draft against, because I feel like you would like all of my players and you would be bidding them up on me, and I'd be very annoyed by it. But that's always a good sign of an auction draft. Some players that I know like to bid people up against people who are position scarce, and that's a great strategy for auction. When you see someone who needs a center, and there's only one really good center, like Brook Lopez, the only good center left, you know that guy needs it, so keep throwing some money out there. Your key in an auction draft is always to get other people to spend more than they wanted to or more than they should have. I mean, that's a dangerous game, right? You could always get stuck with that guy, but so never go too far over what you would pay for a guy. But you got to pay attention to who people are drafting, and that just adds another level of complexity.
So one of my like favorite things to do, and I it's a lot of work. So I usually only end up doing it for my drafts with my friends, because they're the ones who will tease me forever that the guy who gets paid to do this is losing to them. But if you're in a league that you really care about, one of my favorite things to do is to literally print out a sheet of paper, that like a sort of spreadsheet, and I keep track of the positions that people are drafting. And I usually I used to be a teacher, so I have all kinds of markers around, and I'll color code it. I'll have red for an elite player and orange for a very good, yellow for a medium, and I will, as people are taken off the board, keep track of how someone's roster is building out, so that I can do exactly what you were just saying. I know this guy is in desperate need of a big man, and there is a huge drop off behind whoever is left on the board, and I can safely bid him up knowing that they're going to keep bidding.
Yeah, that to some people might seem way overboard or way too complex, but I would actually disagree with anyone who thinks that. If you're not keeping track of the other people's money, and you're not keeping track of who they're drafting, the quality of the people who they're drafting, and who's left on the board, you're kind of missing an entire aspect of the auction draft. Tyler, are you just drafting whoever and not paying attention to anybody else, or do you think it's important to kind of keep tabs on the rest of the league?
No, and I think maybe take it one little step further, in the sense that I like to know the guys I'm going against, right? if I know Mike is huge on, I don't know, any player this year, I know he's going to spend big for him, right?
There was a time period, Tyler, where I'm pretty sure you would nominate and bid up Derrick Rose on me every day.
Yeah,
and
I know
you only got me like twice. You only got me twice.
I know Mike is going right heavy on Derrick Rose. I'm gonna put Derrick Rose out there early, and I'm gonna make Mike spend every penny to get him.
Yeah, being in a lot of Chicago-based drafts up until this year, where I'm pretty sure no one on the Bulls is going to get drafted in my league other than Nico, but Derrick Rose was such a sucker's bid, and you knew someone was going to go to like $6. You're like, this is embarrassing. It was always great.
I mean, but that's something you absolutely should always do in every league. You gotta know who you're drafting against. A lot of my friends lived in, either are from or moved to New York, and so Porzingis is just gonna go for twice as much as. I'm not gonna end up with Porzingis in any of those leagues, but also, I know that I can keep bidding up the price, and they're going to keep matching that price, because the only reason for a New York person to keep following basketball.
Oh yeah, for sure. Tyler, is there anyone you're going to be throwing out there? Let's maybe give some examples of these type of players for this year. Is there anyone you're going to be throwing out there that you just want no part of, but you know, it's maybe you're in a league where you don't know everybody, you know a few people? Who are you throwing out in an auction league so they get bid up?
I think you know who my number one guy is. It's Joel Embiid.
Joel Embiid hype is hot right now, so hot, and you're scared off of Joel Embiid.
I am very scared off of Joel Embiid and his 31 games in the last 3 seasons, and I'm a man who lives in Pennsylvania, so there are many men high on Joel Embiid in my parts of the world.
That's true. Alex, we have a going bet, and I want you to chime in on it. Who is going to play more games next year, Joel Embiid or Isaiah Thomas?
Joel Embiid.
Ooh. See, Tyler thinks it's going to be Isaiah Thomas. And so he's off of Joel Embiid. Actually, he's off of Isaiah Thomas, too, because he's missing a half a season. It's pretty suspect, especially in a head-to-head league.
There's so much. Oh, Embiid is so fun. I just want to root for him. I can't help but be optimistic about him, just because I want him to do well. He's the most entertaining player. He's fun on the court. He's fun off the court. I mean, he's sympathetic because, I mean, can you imagine how terrible that must be to go through these series of injuries, and just got so much upside. Someone I want to root for, and yeah, he's the perfect person to nominate early in an auction draft for everyone else to bid up. But
it sounds like you're going to be the one bidding him up, is what it sounds like.
I would go as high. I would probably go as high as $35-$40 for him.
Really? And then like a $200 kind of standard $200 auction?
Yeah.
That's pretty high. Especially but you're saying he's probably going to play 50 some games. What's your over under?
I would put the over under at 65. Ooh. I think that he's a lock to miss I forget the exact number. I think it's about 14 back-to-backs. I think he's a lock to miss one of those all season. There's at no point in this season will they try him on that. They could be one game out of the playoffs in April, and they will not play him on back-to-back nights. But other than that, I mean, I don't know. Maybe I'm just being optimistic.
Here's my worry again, and then I said this before, and I'll go for it again. The injury he had, they claimed when he first had it, he was going to be 4 to 6 weeks, and he was going to be fine. Why is he still not playing 5-on-5? This is 4 months later, 5 months later than when he got hurt. I don't understand how he's still not playing 5-on-5.
I mean, the Philadelphia medical staff is probably the worst medical staff in the league.
Hold on, the Chicago medical staff would like to have a word with you.
Yeah, and so with the Thunder, I mean, there's like there's some competing people here. I'm so depressed that Joel Embiid didn't get drafted by the Suns. He would just be, I mean, he would be a top 10 pick if he were drafted by the Suns and had their medical staff all these years instead of the 76ers.
Well, I mean, I think if you can guarantee me, which obviously you can't, but if fantasy basketball Jesus came down and said, Mike, I promise you, Joel Embiid will play 65 games next year, I'm probably taking him in the top 10. 65 games for a guy who could possibly average 3 blocks a game, hit threes, score in the 20s, get massive rebounds. I mean, the guy is a kind of almost like a fantasy outlier. There's like very few people you can compare him to historically when you look at his fantasy numbers.
65 games, I would take him at 12. If you promised me 70 games, I would take him at 10.
Wow. What if I promised you 32 games?
I mean, this is
like
where
sporadic.
This is another place. This is another place where your settings, where your settings matter, and you have to know the league that you're in. If you have an IR spot, I was in a league. My first league that I was ever in had 2 IR spots. Then I don't care that he only plays 40 games. He's going to be incredible for those 40 games. If I only have 1 IR spot, which is a little bit more normal, then even if he's still, if he's playing 40 games, head-to-head league with an IR spot, that's.
Yeah, I like him more in roto leagues because you can get by with him, and in a roto league, it's all about quality starts. But when I'm looking at Embiid in an auction draft, I think you're gonna have to overpay to get him because all it takes is one person to like him more than you, and I don't want to overpay for anyone, especially anyone with a big question mark next to his name. And so I think I'm gonna have to side with Tyler. Is that this is a guy, him and Isaiah Thomas are both guys you throw out there and let the bidding begin. Throw it out there like right after the first round of people, or even right away. I kind of like Alex. I kind of like your strategy of throwing out someone you really want first to catch everybody off guard, because everybody's expecting Kevin Durant and Westbrook and Harden. But then once there's still money on the board, throw out those guys you just want to bleed money away from instead of throwing out Kyrie Irving or Jimmy Butler. Get Isaiah out of the way. Get Embiid out of the way. Is there anyone else you'd like to throw out when you're just trying to bleed money out there?
Rookies. I'm always throwing out rookies.
Ooh, rookies. That's a good one.
Every
Great
year.
call.
Yeah, just
I think in
That's an
redraft,
excellent call.
they always get a little bit overdrafted, and someone's always hyped, right? I was in an auction mock on ESPN last week, and someone paid $25 for Lonzo Ball.
Wow.
And I was like, he's yours, man. You enjoy him.
Yeah, so settle down over there, whoever that was. Like, that's a little aggressive.
This is going to sound silly because I just spent all this time saying that I'm willing to sort of go for Joel Embiid, but I usually throw out Chris Paul. I almost never have Chris Paul on my teams. I'm always worried about his legs and him just falling off the wagon in terms of his health. He's obviously an incredible player. And, once in the last 4 years, I did this in an auction league and no one bid. And so I was like, all right, if you're going to give me Chris Paul for $40, fine. But he's one of the people I usually nominate early to try and get people to bid up interest.
Man, if I can get in a league where people don't like Chris Paul, I'd be cleaning up. I think Chris Paul is always a bit of an underrated fantasy guy, simply because of his steals and assists and his low turnover. And like I said, I play Roto 9 Cat, so that turnover really matters. and that raises him up from where he would be normally in a head-to-head league to a much higher spot in a Roto league.
And in a Roto 9-cat this year, he's probably rated because in a D'Antoni system, he's probably going to shoot more threes, and his turnover rate might go down even because of ball with Harden. So he could actually sort of have two swings. So, his points might go down a little, his assists might go down a little, but his threes might go up and his turnovers might go down. In Roto 9-cat, he might be going pretty underrated.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case in the sense that like a lot of my drafts, especially in Roto, I see guys like Jokic and Gobert shooting above him. Sometimes DeMarcus Cousins, like sometimes he falls into that mid-second round, sometimes even past 15 to like 16, 17, 18. And I'm like, man, how do you not take Chris Paul here?
Yeah, I'm surprised in any Roto league where I see Chris Paul fall. And I don't know. I guess I'm just not worried about them, those old crafty point guards. Because Chris Paul is almost like kind of he's not beat you with speed. He's not a Derrick Rose lightning fast type of guy. He's a misdirection change of pace type of point guard who can just weave in and out of people. But it's really his ability to almost on a dime completely change his direction and pace that keeps people confused in his absurd court vision. And like you're saying, people are down on him because he's with Harden, but in D'Antoni's system, I don't think anybody should be down on Chris Paul. No, sir. Let's talk about guys at the end of the draft. So in a snake draft, it's easier to get a sleeper in a snake draft. And this is why. In a snake draft, you could go reach down a little bit. You can find those guys who are hidden off the screen during your draft, or people that no one's ever thought of. Like no one's thinking about Jamal Murray. You can just go grab him in the 10th round, 11th round. But in an auction draft, you have to bid this guy out. Is there anyone you're looking at who you think people are so far out on that you can get him for like $1 or $2 at the end of your draft and sneak one by people?
So I don't understand why JJ Redick isn't generating more excitement. He's in a perfect landing spot for him. Like I couldn't have designed a better spot for JJ Redick to land. And no one's talking about him. He's ranked outside the top 100 by most major sites. I think you could probably get him for $1, maybe $2, which to me is crazy. I have him at 85 on my own personal ranking system. Like, to me, that's nuts.
Are you a fan, Tyler, of JJ?
Yeah, I think JJ's definitely big time underrated this year, just in the sense that I think Philly's gonna get him open and they're gonna let him fire a lot of threes, and he will probably make a lot of threes.
Yeah, I mean, and that's important.
He'll be wide open.
I think everyone's excited for Philly, and the fact that everybody's excited for Philly and JJ's going under the radar doesn't make too much sense to me. But maybe it's because there's so much hype around Embiid and Simmons and Fultz that JJ is just kind of no one's paying attention to him. I kind of like that as a steal late in the draft where you get him somewhere between $1 and $3. Would you consider? And I think this would go through. Would you consider taking Rudy Gay for $1?
Oh yeah,
because I think everyone's out on Rudy Gay. Everybody's like, Rudy Gay is not he's gonna suck. Now, if you're playing with some kind of new players who just name recognition and they're looking at the rankings and they see Rudy Gay really high, that's on ESPN. Maybe that won't work. But Rudy Gay for $1 or $3, why not?
I got a lengthy list if you want to hear them.
Throw them out there. Let's me and Alex will bid on, and you throw them out there.
All right. First guy on the list, Derek Favors. I just think that they're going to let him play power forward, and he's going to bounce back some.
I only want him for $1.
I would be surprised if he only goes for $1.
Yeah, I'm looking at ESPN's like auction prices, $1.06 average draft. So that seems crazy to me. Jeremy Lin is another guy, $1.05.
I'll pay $5.
Whoa.
Like Gary Harris, $1.05 is their average.
I'll pay much more than $5.
Is the average price. Jamal Murray's in there. Enos Kanter, who I think is going to be in the top 100 player in New York. Rodney Hood. I mean, there's a crazy amount of guys that you can get for like a dollar, less than $2, according to ESPN.
So this is Joe Ingles. He's not going to fly under the radar in some really competitive leagues, but in medium competitive leagues, he's probably available. If we're talking about $1, I'm gonna get Frank Ntilikina. I don't have any idea how to say his last name.
Tyler, we need your expertise.
Frank Ntilikina. That's how you say it. Trust me,
Great.
don't try it.
Ntilikina.
Yep, that's it.
That's it.
All right, thank you.
It took me 3 episodes. It took you 3 seconds.
So Frank Ntilikina, I'm gonna grab him for $1 every time if I can. Maybe I drop him after a week, but if he's getting 25 minutes, the first week of the season, which their depth chart is terrible, that's totally reasonable, then you might have like a real gem. You might have a solid starter. For $1, I'll take whatever random bull floats your boat. I mean,
that's actually what I was going to say. If you're in your last pick, and I actually want to say, would you take Ntilikina, Chris Dunn, or Milo Teodosic? I think that's a pretty good dollar crew of point guards there.
I'd take Ntilikina. I already forgot. Dang it.
Frank Ntilikina. You got it.
Ntilikina. Frank Ntilikina. I would take Frank Ntilikina first among that group, and then the Clippers point guard second. I'm never really been all that high on Chris Dunn. If he works out as an NBA player, I don't think it will be the most fantasy friendly game.
He's the point guard of the future in Chicago, though. What? Some sort of dystopian future, apparently.
He's making fun of the Bulls. Don't just let him go. He's in his own little world right now. Mirotic is also going for $1 on ESPN, which surprises me a little bit.
That's absurd.
Yeah,
I think that's partly because of the uncertainty. I think that'll go up.
Yeah, I think here in the next couple of weeks, that's definitely going to go up.
That's a good possibility. Ntilikina, if we're talking about him, it's a real good play in the sense that many minutes has Ramon Sessions played for like the last 5 years, like right around 20 a game. And Ron Baker is not a point guard. Sorry, Knicks. He's not a point guard. And I'm not sure Jarrett Jack's ever going to be healthy again. So
Tyler, don't apologize to the Knicks. Apologize to Ron Baker's family. Come on. Calling him not a point guard.
I just said he wasn't a point guard. I didn't say he wasn't an NBA player. I said he's not a point guard.
All right. Okay.
So, I should get the
Robin Lopez is being ignored.
I'm a little worried about Robin Lopez. We talked about this not too long ago, actually, probably yesterday. We like Robin Lopez, and I think when he plays, if he plays the amount of time he played last year, he's perfectly fine at the end of the drafts for some big man stats. He's very consistent. I'm a little worried about that Bulls team, looking at their roster and looking at the fact that they need to lose and just being like, let's run the kids out there all the time and putting Lauri Markkanen at the 5 spot more often and seeing Robin Lopez's minutes kind of dwindle into the low 20s. And if he's in the low 20s, I'm not sure I want him in a standard league.
So you clearly know the Bulls sort of backstory a little better than I do. They don't have to try to lose with this roster. And on some level, aren't Garpax fighting for their job? Don't they have to win enough games? I mean, or are they just never going to get fired no matter how bad a job they do?
There's there's a pretty good consensus that it's an old boys club. that nepotism runs wild there. They only hire people who went to colleges with these guys or they know them personally. That's what happened with Fred Hoiberg. The ownership cares more about the White Sox winning than the Bulls winning. And so I think it's a little bit somewhere in between. The ownership is finally understanding and getting the idea that Gar Forman and Paxton are a laughingstock, but those guys are attached at the hip. Their wives are in charge of the charity boards in the Bulls association. Like that, they're entrenched into the Bulls organization, and it's going to take a move from Reinsdorf, one of the Reinsdorfs, Jerry or his son. His son's really running the Bulls now, to finally just go, we're a laughingstock. Players don't want to come here. You're all out. And when you're rebuilding, why? I see the logic. Why do that now? It doesn't make any sense to do it now. We're rebuilding. We're going to lose a bunch of games. Let them lose a bunch of games for 2 years and then try to reshuffle. But I think those guys, their jobs are safe for another 2 years, and it's just sad.
Oh, that's really depressing. Just like as someone who likes basketball, I mean, they're so bad.
Well, as someone who is a Bulls season ticket holder, I'm more depressed and probably going to lose a bunch of money this year. So, oh well. So I think we've done enough lip service for the hardcores out there, all the auction people, and there is not a lot of people talking about auction drafts. So I wanted to spend a good amount of time talking about different strategies around auction drafts and how people look at it. Let's talk about. Oh, go ahead.
So just one last thing on auction drafts that I sort of wanted to fit in earlier, but it never really fit our flow. This year, I think there's so I'm usually like really down on the stars and studs or studs and duds strategy in auction. I think it's too expensive. But I think this year, if you go into it with an open mind and you say, there are 8 people who could legitimately end the season as the #1 overall fantasy player, and then there are 7 more who might end up in the top 10. You're comfortable with whichever 2 or 3 of those that you get. I think that there's a lot of legitimacy to going in and just saying, here is my list of, the top 8 to 12 players, and I will take any one of them that goes for under $53. You could put together, because I think that people will say, like, I think that there's going to be the mindset in drafts that, only the first 2 or 3 picks go for $65. Where on the 8th guy, Alex, they can't be going for the same price.
You just dropped out. We missed that. Just paraphrase that again.
Where was I?
You were saying just set a price like $53 and then go after whoever.
Okay. So I think that, a lot of people will have this mindset that only the top 2 or 3 players go for 65 plus. And so half of that top 8 isn't going to go for that 60 to 65 range that they deserve to go in. And so there's going to be a lot of value there. And you could have 2 or 3 players who might reasonably be a first overall pick in a snake draft on your team, $100 as opposed to for 120. And so I think that that's a reasonable strategy this year, whereas in most years I would really hate that strategy.
Yeah, I kind of like that idea, and kind of setting a limit for yourself and just going, hey, if I get one of these guys for this price, this is great. He could be the #1 player at the end of the year. But if everyone's going, if that top 8 ends up going for a certain amount of money, now you're sitting there with the most money on the board, and you're looking at those 2-tier, second-tier, third-tier players, and I would just mop up the floor with those second and third-tier players and then take all these little hidden gems that we've been talking about, your Jamal Murray's and your Gary Harris's and all these guys that are way down on the list, the Nico Miritich's of the world. And you can have about 4 or 5 guys from the top 30 ranking, and then a bunch of guys who'll sneak up in that 60-50 range. That's a hell of a team. Let's move on to some snake strategies, and I feel like people know a lot more about the snake drafts, so we don't have to get too crazy into the detail here. But I just kind of wanted to go around and see how you approach your snake draft. And I mean, what is the and I actually like to pose this question: what is the over/under on how many mock drafts you do before a snake draft? And Tyler, you go first.
Over/under on how many mock drafts I do?
Before your first snake draft.
Oh God, you don't want to know. Degenerate gambler here. Don't ask those kind of questions.
What about you, Alex?
I try to get in, 5. Some years I only get in 2 or 3. The last year or two, I've been fortunate enough to, have this be more of my main focus in life. So I've been able to get up into the, 15s and 20s. But as a casual player, I think you gotta do at least 3. They don't take that long. You might as well bow out after the 8th or 9th round when everyone else bowed out anyways.
They don't take too long when everybody drops out.
So I think there's a ton of value to be gained in doing at least, 2 or 3. And if you can get above 5 or 6, you're in a much better spot than if you only do 1 or don't do any.
Yeah, at the very least, a couple hours before the draft, 2-3 hours before the draft, go run through it a couple times. Find where you're actually going to be drafting at the position, and just run through it at least a few times. I did about 7 yesterday, so I think I'm way above average on amount of mock drafts done. So in a similar fashion, I think you have to have your own personal rankings based on your league. Going into either a snake or an auction draft. But in a snake draft, you're not going to be able to get the players that you want. You're going to have to take the players that are available whenever your pick comes up. So do you go into a draft looking to punt something based on the first player you're going to get, or do you let your punt strategy kind of evolve over time?
So I'll tease an article that'll probably come out probably early next week. I like punting points in the first place. And this article I'm writing is going to make the argument that this year is a particularly good year for punting points. But I generally advocate not going into it with, if you're able to do it on the fly, you're going to be better off because you're going to be better able to take advantage of, the values that come to you. I think you need to have an idea, at least a vague idea of how picking DeAndre Jordan in particular, but if you're in 9-cat, taking Russell Westbrook or James Harden, I think you need an idea of how that impacts you because those sort of box you into punting various categories. But I don't love going into it with the idea of I'm going to punt this specific thing, although that is certainly a strategy that I have used before and will use at least a few times this year.
Oh, that makes sense. Tyler, you actually, I don't think ever punt points. Like you're against punting points.
No, that's actually not true. I think points is a category I punted in 2 drafts last year. Here's the strategy behind it, right? Everybody likes that sexy big number, and points is the sexiest, biggest number. And so you can, especially if the people you're playing against are not, how do I want to say this? They're not paying attention to you. You can get away with
basketball savvy.
Yes, you can punt points and have an exceptional team. It's not my favorite strategy to do. It's not the one I do the most often, but it is definitely a great strategy.
Well, you had me fooled, Tyler. I thought you were a points aficionado. Because when we in our last episode, we ended up building a mock draft, like kind of the first 6 rounds of around Russell Westbrook, and we went after points hard. But if you're getting Russell Westbrook, you should probably not punt points. It doesn't make too much sense.
Right.
Personally, I like to wait until about the 3rd round. So I'll take the best player available in the 1st round. I'll take the best player available in the 2nd round. And then in the 3rd round, I'll start saying, all right, what am I weak in? What am I strong in? Do I need to balance out those things that I'm weak in? Or do I want to just completely punt those things that I'm weak in based on the players that come up? And that 3rd and 4th round really kind of solidifies what punt direction I go. Just because that's, to me, the most questionable rounds. The 3rd and 4th round get real sticky because people are starting to reach for players. They're starting to take people they want that they know they're not going to get back. Well, 15 picks later when their next pick shows up. So people reaching down a whole round below you, and they'll definitely screw you over. And you gotta be aware of those kind of things. So I try not to punt until at least that 3rd or 4th round. Do you have any specific mid-round strategies, Tyler?
No, I mean, I'm always just trying to build a team, and I think we talked about this a little bit yesterday, that I sometimes will even adjust my strategy slightly, depending on what kind of team I'm building. But I'm always just looking to build a real well-rounded team, and I'm looking for points. If I'm not punting points, I'm looking for points early because, like I always say, those 20-point scores dry up real quick.
What about you, Alex?
I mean, so as you said, and as we said, you got to have a rankings going into it, and if you can have your own rankings, that's much better. Or at a minimum, find some expert you like and take theirs. But if you can be sort of familiar with that, then you can say, I hate every single player between pick 36 and 50, and I don't want any of them. And as a result, going into a draft and knowing that I'm going to use that pick as I feel like totally liberated to take Gary Harris if I want, even though it's kind of a reach, because I'm not going to be happy with that pick no matter what.
And also, if you like Gary Harris, right? If you like him, you think he's going to be a top 50 player, and you want to take him at the bottom of the 4th round, and he's ranked 100 on Yahoo, you're picking him at face value. That's at the worst thing you could do is overdraft him. So you're not overdrafting him. You're drafting him where his value is, and that's perfectly fine because it guarantees you're going to get him, and no one's going to snake him in the next round.
Yeah. So and I mean, it's sort of another thing to pay attention to, especially in the middle rounds, is sort of tiers of players. So at the end of the 4th or 5th round, there's at least one position by definition that you don't have someone in. If you don't have a point guard at the end of the 4th round, I see a big drop off between Eric Bledsoe and Drew Holiday and Goran Dragic, who's my next point guard on the board. So if I'm missing a point guard, I've got to grab Drew and let that, I can't let that tiers gap slide, even if, there's a player on the board that who I have ahead of Drew, that I would rather take, but I can't afford that drop at that starting point guard position.
And yeah, that makes perfect sense, especially when you get in the 4th, 5th, and 6th round. You gotta start re-ranking your players based on your team instead of the overall rankings. And having those positional tiers really does help. So I'd actually suggest people, there's positional tiers out there. Do your own if you want to. If you don't want to download one, I prefer to do my own. But there's stuff out there if you want to print them out and then adjust them accordingly. At least find a baseline to go off of.
Can I do a little quick shameless plug here?
Oh, please do. You got this points article coming out. Is that on RotoWire?
So I'm all about shameless plugs. My current pinned tweet is So Twitter at my last name at RIKLEEN. I wrote the tiers articles that are a part of Yahoo's fantasy basketball draft kit. So my point guard tiers, my shooting guard tiers, etc. It's my pinned tweet. If you go to my profile, it's right there on the top. So if you're looking to build tiers, I recommend make your own. Use mine as a guide, but make your own.
Yeah, start with Alex as a baseline. I mean, this worked out really well. If you were looking for tiers, you now have a direct link to those tiers over on Yahoo.
So yeah, but big. So I'm a big fan of using tiers in those middle rounds, and I like getting my guys, getting my players who I have higher than where I'm picking.
You want it to be your team, right? I mean, you always want the players you want. I think that's sometimes where people make the mistake is, oh, Brook Lopez is the next guy on the board. I got to take him, but I don't like Brook Lopez. Like, no, take somebody you want. Like, the worst thing that's going to happen is you're going to lose your league, right? But if you lose your league with players you hate, you're going to hate yourself. Whereas if you lose the league with players you like, well, then you're probably like, all right, well, at least I enjoyed watching some basketball.
I don't hate winning, Tyler.
So I mean, that's one of my biggest pieces of advice to people who are new to fantasy is this game is supposed to be fun, and we do it for enjoyment. So if you hate the Knicks or if you hate my Celtics, don't draft a Knick or don't draft a Celtic. If you can't stand Otto Porter because he looked at your ex-girlfriend funny and when you guys were at college together, Otto Porter.
Well, hold on. That seems incredibly specific.
It's not actually Otto Porter. It's I don't even remember exactly who it is. It was someone it was some sort of third string wide receiver.
So it was not Otto Porter.
It was some not third string. It was some wide receiver 3 2014 who hit on my friend's girlfriend, and so he would never draft that guy in fantasy. And you know what? Good. Don't like the player, don't put him on your team.
Listeners out there, if you can reconstruct who that is, feel free to tweet that player out and then call Rick Lino. No, don't do that. Don't do that. That'd be a bad idea. Yeah, I actually one time I've had a couple run-ins with some NBA players, but the most interesting time was Paul George's rookie year. We were at a club in Indianapolis. Don't ask me why I was in a club in Indianapolis. And my buddy was like, hey, man, we could just walk up to the VIP section. Let's go up there. And I was like, yeah, the bouncer's not paying attention. Let's just go. So we're in the VIP section hanging out, just standing around. And all of a sudden we're like, yo, is that – and you don't know Paul George at this time, but I was like, is that Paul George? Kind of looks like Paul George. That kind of looks exactly like Paul George. Paul George was hanging out in the VIP section, like on the couch next to us. It's pretty awesome. And then I think the bouncer gave us kind of like a, man, what are those two dudes doing back here? That can't be right. So he kind of just stared us down, and then we walked down. And he was like, yep. Tyler, what's your run-in with an NBA star?
I can't tell you on here, but I'll tell you later.
Oh wow, man, that is if there's a teaser and a half, that is it. It's it better not be. I saw Amari Stoudemire in his Steak and Shake, because that's also one of my stories.
I can safely say that's not it.
It was like 2 a.m. and I was like, yeah, this definitely Amari Stoudemire just hanging out, eating a 5-way chili.
So I can't do it anymore, but because it's just totally useless at this point. But for years, for the last couple of years, one of my last picks would be Jared Dudley, because he was at Boston College while I was there. And while there's no chance that he knew my name, he did recognize my face, and he would give me that nod when we passed each other. He would give me sort of the cursory, I recognize your face nod.
from campus. Yeah, one of those. Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I mean, I sat like front row at all the BC basketball games, and Boston College does not have a large fan base. So it was, I was like, me and the four guys there, he knew who we were. But yeah, so it was pick Jared Dudley if I could. But yeah, the point is pick a team you enjoy.
Yeah. Do what you enjoy. You're supposed to enjoy this game. It's not supposed to be a burden. So I think the last thing I wanted to cover is probably the thing that everybody wanted to hear about. So that's why I saved it for last. That's called smart marketing. It's why they put all the important stuff in the back of the store and all the trinkets in the front. So you got to walk past them. The late rounds, kind of, in my opinion, where you can make or break your fantasy season. And in the late rounds, we have a philosophy that we want to actually go for a higher ceiling guys. So guys who maybe you don't know if they're going to have the playing time or whatever, but they got a real high ceiling if they can hit it. And so do you have any of those late round sleepers that you would recommend people keeping an eye on?
So yeah, I do. I tend to develop a better sense of those over the next, week or two. But I certainly have some already. I absolutely agree with the strategy. When it gets to when you are drafting your fantasy bench, you should assume that you will be dropping these players within a month and that the risk is literally zero. Pay no attention to, ESPN's pre-draft ranking and draft the guy you think who is in the highest situation. So some of the people who I've been taking there, JJ Redick is someone who I already said. Marquise Chris is someone who Roto World is like really high on, and so if you're in a draft with people who use Roto World heavily, then he'll already be off the board.
Yeah, Chris is picking up
pretty
steam,
much but pretty much everyone else has him like down in the 150s. So if you're in a league where he's down in the 150s, I'm happy to take him in the 10th or 11th. I like Frank Ntilikina. And
it's good. That was way better.
And if I don't get him, I'm getting to Aaron Fox. I like Ersan Ilyasova a lot. There's a lot of stats to be had on bad teams. Every NBA team scores 90+ points a night, and there are not enough good players on the Hawks or on the Bulls to score 90 points. So they got to get there somehow. So
yeah,
I'm taking a bunch of late round Hawks and Bulls, like Taurean Prince, Ersan Ilyasova, Robin Lopez, Lauri Markkanen, even Paul Zipser maybe if the other Bulls are gone, because realistically we are all guessing which Bull will score 18 points a night, but one of them will.
Yeah, with some of those, I think you kind of hit the nail on the head, is that there's a lot of minutes to go around, a lot of shots to be had on some of these really, really terrible teams. And right now we just don't know what's going to happen. So take a flyer on the guy you like the most and be prepared to drop him in 2 days after the season starts. And at the very least, you should have 2, maybe 3 guys at the end of your bench that you're willing to just drop for anyone who is better. Especially if you're head-to-head, you should be streaming anyway. But your last few picks should be guys who are very, very expendable. The rounds kind of before that, I like to take a flyer on guys who – I like to mix it up. I like to take more flyers on guys who have high ceilings, and then maybe get like 1 or 2 guys who are like very consistently solid. Like Wilson Chandler. That's not a sexy name. Nobody cares about Wilson Chandler. But Wilson Chandler's going to be perfectly fine this year. He's going to do what Wilson Chandler always does, and you got that consistency. If you're in one of those, one of those deeper drafts, you're going to get that consistency. But, I'm also kind of looking at guys at the very end of the draft like Scalabassier. That guy's,
Yeah, I was just about to say him.
I like him. I like him a lot.
He was the next one.
He's got some interesting stats. Let's see, who else do I like around those way deep picks?
Seth Curry.
Ooh, Seth Curry. I mean, I don't know what's going on in Dallas, but right, he's probably going to play a bit.
I mean, if Rick Carlisle is a much better coach than I am, but if I were the coach of the Dallas Mavericks, I would be running Dennis Smith and Seth Curry out there 30 minutes a night for both of them. And Yogi Ferrell and JJ Barrera take like 12 each. But I would be giving both of those guys 30 plus. And Seth Curry, a pretty decent player.
I think he'd be perfectly. He's going to be probably a top 100 player. And if nobody's drafting him, or you get him in the last pick, okay, you got a top 100 player with your last pick. Congratulations, like, good job. What about you, Tyler? Is there any sleepers you like?
I'll bring back a cut that I made a few weeks ago, and it's Bogdan Bogdanovic. The Kings don't have a small forward. I think they're going to give Bogdanovic huge minutes. I think he's the better version of Buddy Hield in the sense that I think he's going to be a pretty decent three-point shooter. He can actually play some defense. He can score. I just really like him, especially as a last-round pick. No one's really on him. That's a guy I'm getting a ton in my last round.
And for the listeners at home, that is the new Bogdanovic, the newer, younger, sexier version of Bogdanovic on the Sacramento Kings, not the older. I feel like I've heard of that dude. Wasn't he on the Nets version of Bogdanovic, who is actually on the Pacers? Everyone, pay attention.
So yeah, the one on the Kings is Bogdan, and the other one is Boj. The last name is the same. The only difference is the one on the Kings is GD, and he's the one who's new to the league. And the other one on the Pacers now is Boj. The funny thing is, Bogdan Bogdanovic, the one on the Kings, I remember he was drafted right before Bojan Bogdanovic made his debut. And I didn't realize that they were different players. And so when Bojan Bogdanovic came out, I thought like, oh, silly Americans, everyone was spelling his name wrong on ESPN during the draft day. And now that he made a roster, they fixed it.
Wow.
I didn't realize that they were different people.
It wasn't that bad. Turns out the copy editor at ESPN was not slacking off that day. It was actually a real person. Tyler, one of the sleepers you like is John Collins. Are you still after that guy? You still after John Collins?
I am not going for John Collins in a standard league, probably just because I don't know that he's going to play huge minutes on opening night, and especially in a head-to-head league, I don't want to wait around for a rookie. John Collins probably a guy I think is going to be worth picking up though at some point in your head-to-head league.
He's a classic. You put him on your watch list literally as soon as the draft is over. And, seriously, set an alarm in your phone for February 1st. Like, set an event in your phone, February 1st, check John Collins' stats.
Make it really ambiguous, like, it's John Collins season, boy. And then you're like, February 1st, you're like, what the hell is this? What the hell does this mean? What the hell does this mean? And your girlfriend's like, who the hell is John Collins? Who you been talking to?
Because he's the type of player who really could take over a role later in the season and could be pretty good. Jared Allen you can include him in the same exact note. These are players who I can't imagine them mattering before February, but once trade season sort of picks up, once we get close to the All-Star break, once teams get a little less ambiguous about punting or tanking, that's when these guys start to shine. And there's some talent in these players.
Definitely. I feel like this year is deeper than usual. We're talking about people who are going to be relevant in a standard league. That I just think there's more people vying for standard league relevancy than there usually is. There's going to be a lot of people who will surprise everyone at the end of the season when you see them in the top 100. And I like that. I like that the NBA is getting deeper. I like that fantasy basketball is expanding its waiver wires, no matter how big or deep of a league you play in. So I like that. I think that's a pretty good sleeper list. Is there anything else about snake drafts that you think the people should know, Alex?
I mean, this is not snake draft specific, but if you have an early draft, I like to pick up, especially an early draft where you're not allowed to make waiver moves until you get closer to the season. I like picking up someone like Rashawn Holmes or Frank Kaminsky, or Tyler Ulis. These are guys who are going to be inexpensive, and you might cut literally before the season starts. But if anything happens to Joel Embiid, if anything happens to Eric Bledsoe, and if anything happens to Dwight Howard, all three players who might get hurt, those three players could be looking at a big role, and all of them have shown that they are clear top 100 players when they have a big role. So that's not necessarily snake draft, but depending on your calendar, those are people to look at.
Yeah, I think in deeper leagues, handcuffing actually does happen. It's kind of interesting to see that carrying over from football, people handcuffing their point guards with quality guys like the guys you mentioned. Tyler, you got any other snake draft tips?
Know your league, pay attention, have a nice rankings. That's all I got. You do those three things, you'll probably be pretty all right.
Yeah, that's pretty solid advice. I think that's it for our auction versus snake draft podcast. Alex, thanks for joining us. Where can people find you? Where can they read you?
I tweet out all my articles, and I write for a bunch of places, so that's probably the easiest place. At my last name, Rikleen. I'm on RotoWire. That's sort of my main gig, and do a lot of stuff for DraftKings. And then I sort of flirt with Yahoo. CBS has been trying to set up a date with me.
Yeah. It sounds great.
I'm begging them to publish some of my articles, and it looks like it might happen. But
congratulations.
So I'm sort of all over the place.
Well, good. I mean, your work's getting out there. If people want those player tiers, they're over there on Yahoo, and that's a good place to start out. So yeah, thanks for coming on the show, Alex.
Thanks for having me.
Tyler, what do you got going on? Any new articles?
Just give a plug for if you want custom rankings. Just send me the league, send me the specifics, and I'll get them out to you. You can find me on Twitter at Watsy4444.
That's right. It's 4 4s, so it's extra confusing for everybody on Twitter. But if you're listening this long and this much, you probably already know that one by now. And you can find me at Watch the Boxes if you want to join our hashtag basketball sponsored Watching the Boxes annual head-to-head 9-cat players only fun times fantasy league, which is the name of the league. Go ahead, DM me or Tyler, or go ahead and message at #basketball. And I think we only have like 2 spots left, like 1 or 2 spots left. So get them in while they're hot. And other than that, I think that's it for tonight. Thanks for joining me, everybody, and have a good night.